Hey, top of the morning to you. Michael here, GoodNewsRoo. Take just a few minutes this morning to continue through John 10. That's what we're going to talk about. I have my, I know, I'm that guy. I have two of these, but, oops, you can't see my desk, can you? I have two of these. I started one in 2020, and I went through it, and then it wasn't until after that, that I started doing this on the show. So thanks for being here this morning. I'm going to go ahead and lay this track down. And with whoever pops up, and we're going to talk about the rest of John 10 before we get into John 11, which is a pretty amazing chapter. How I remember it is because I've read it several times, but also I draw a little picture that reminds me, but this is where Lazarus comes out. God does some, Jesus in person of God does some serious work here. So give us one more second, and I'm going to head right into it here. All right, here we go. Let's see. I want to start here in this. I'm going to show you one little tie-in from last week. And so sometimes, do I do different sketches or paintings in each? Sometimes I do. I just say like, ooh, this hits me differently this time I read it. So this is not so much about the art as it is you having a vision, not a vision, well, maybe, but having a memory recall of the picture that takes you back to the story. So if you're in the mode with grandkids or sitting at the counter with someone and they say, I just don't think that Jesus was, he was a good man, but I just don't think he was God. And you'll go, wait a minute, I remember some things I sketched in John 8, 9, 10, where he's talking about my sheep, I'm the shepherd, I'm the gate, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the light. And you're suddenly going like, whoa, wait just a minute. This is pretty serious here. He is basically telling them that he's the long-awaited Messiah that they've been waiting on. They were just expecting someone else. They were expecting a military leader. They were expecting a king. They were expecting an empire to be built and push Rome down and crush Rome. And that's not what came. What came was a baby in a manger and turned everything upside down, who said, I am God. I am God incarnate. I came as God. I'm God come as a human. And so wrap your head around that. And so that'll take us into our story and our and my sketch for today on just what it is. Remember, it's not about the art. It's not how good you are. It's not if you can draw hands or feet or faces or people. I know you'll draw better than me because those are my worst things that I draw. So it's kind of funny. So, all right, so here we go. Let's pick up in this and we'll just take off. I love that little piece of music, and I enjoy coming in. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to share the story with you. This was last week. There's a rooster I'm working on. I'll put that over there. If you remember last week, I sketched, let's see, in this Bible here, I sketched this little painting that says, hey, I heard my name. And I've also done this painting tiny that says, if he said he was the gate, I'm staying right here. Or I am the good shepherd, it says. And so this is where from chapter 8 through chapter 9, chapter 8, he heals the blind man, and then who the scribes and the Pharisees are always pushing. Wow, have you ever worked at a job where you just argued all the time? Where my job is just to go in and argue. And I'm not talking about defense attorneys or lawyers who have to wrestle cases to the mat, but to just everyday life of just arguing about things. What a waste of time. What a killer of the excitement of life when you just go, I think this is red. No, it's not. It's more of mauve. No, it's not mauve. Well, you don't know what mauve is. Well, you go, wait a minute here. So these Pharisees and these scribes, they spent so much of their time arguing with Jesus because, here's why. You want to give them a little bit of grace? And he did, right? But here's the thing. They just had such a preconceived notion of what the worship was, what the synagogue meant, what their church as we see it today is, and what it should be. And how many times have we I've been on church staffs. How many times have we been tied up into church conversations about music and how people dress and the color of the carpet and the right kind of lighting and whether or not there should be a guitar or an organ, or I mean, it just goes on and on and we're going like, oh my gosh, those are not the things of God. Those are things of man. Those are the trappings, I call them. That's an interesting word. I don't mean that they trap us, but they do trap us. But those are the things that we put around on our desk. I just can't have a desk if it doesn't have an anvil on it. I just couldn't be in an office that had a desk without an anvil. I'm going like, seriously? I like them and I use them as paper weights and I talk about them and I'm a blacksmith and so they're tied to me. But that doesn't mean this is not a desk and I can't work here just because I don't have an anvil. But we do that sometimes. You know, it just didn't seem like church today because no one played the organ. You're going like, really? I have several friends. I was storytelling with them one day, and he was telling me that I just feel like this final prayer must have a piano in it. And I said, seriously? So you're thinking that the final prayer, as they dismiss people, must have music? Why? Oh, it just has to. It has to. He wasn't telling me that it might move the heart or it's a way to create a flow. And I agree. Look, I'm a producer. Look at movies. They're dead without music. But I don't think it was one of those things when Jesus is talking to these disciples or when he's talking to the crowds on the Sea of Galilee and he's standing on the edge of the boat. I don't think right before he blesses the food where the little boy has the fish and the loaves that he says, Peter, quick, bring the organ out of the basement of the boat there and go down the steps, you know, if it even had steps, or just under the covers, get the organ and get out here and play us some old hymn so we can really set this up. I don't think he did that. And yet we have these things locked into our brain that it has to be the certain way. I think that's why when I read the story about the scribes and the Pharisees, I'm kind of sad for them. I'm really sort of sorry that they couldn't wrap their head around who this amazing man was who came and walked on our earth. Because they didn't buy it until later. Maybe some never did, that he was God. And so that's what John is trying to say. He came and I preached about it and then you missed it. So here he is in the middle of it. So there's your recap. And I throw that not at you. I throw that out there because I grew up in a small community who would often say, if we don't do this, you know, it's always like having a dinner on the ground. If we don't serve potato salad, then this hasn't been a church homecoming. You're going like, seriously? Who told you that? Well, it's the way my grandfather did it. So your grandfather was right. Well, it's the way his grandfather did it. Oh, so his grandfather was right. Do you see where I'm headed with this? Sometimes our arguments, here's my quote. Sometimes arguments like that hold less water than a roll of chicken wire. You would expect a rooster painter to use a chicken wire as an analogy, right? Sometimes arguments hold less water than a roll of chicken wire. And you just got to go, let it go. What if he was God? What if he was the way? What if he was the truth? What if he was the light? What if he was the good shepherd? What if he is the gate? Was, is, and are. He said, I am, which means not I was, not I will be, I am. Through time, I am. So we can always see. The first time he identifies himself to Moses in the Bible, the first time God calls himself by name in the Bible, I think, remember, I'm not a trained theologian, I'm a storyteller, but the first time I think he names himself as God is when Moses sees the burning bush. And he says, Moses, and you've seen the Ten Commandments. It's a great portrayal. And he's going like, take off your shoes for you're standing on holy ground. And Moses is going like, wait a minute, if it's burning, I don't want to step in some embers here. But he takes off his shoes. And I wonder if in my storytelling way that he just needed Moses to have nothing between him and the ground where God was saying was holy. Just put your feet in the sand. Just move a little closer here. And Moses says, Who am I going to tell these people that I've been talking to? And God says, I am. And he goes back down and he says to these people, how do you know to do this? And what about these laws? And he says, I am sent me. And they're like, whoa. In their teaching, they honored God. They just didn't expect God to come like this. And so now they're fighting and arguing with him. So the story that I wrote, or the picture that I drew in this one, was this. I am. And so I drew last week a couple of sheep standing at a gate in my other Bible of John. This one I drew the first time was a little sheep standing there that says, hold on a second. I just heard my voice. I know that name. Jesus says, my sheep know me and they know my voice. You recognize the voice of God. Maybe you don't, but when you do, your life will change forever. Now, the suffering isn't over on this planet. That's not what Jesus came to do, is just make us have everything work out and the right job and the right places and all the, look, we're living in a place that's broken. I don't even watch the news. It's so broken because I don't know who to trust and what, but I'm thinking, I just can stay in walking in the truth and treat people the way I need to treat people and believe these things that I read here and just see what happens in life. Make a dent, leave a hole. I say this as an artist all the time. Okay, so that was the last group. All right, you with me? Catch me up? Here we go. All right. So this was my drawing from last week, and then I went through here. Didn't even finish this one yet, but this is where he's doing the I am statements. And in my other Bible, I drew these guys holding a rock. And here's my sketch for today that I've started, and I'm going to paint it here in just a little bit. But I want to finish up chapter 10 today by this. At this time, the Feast of Dedication took place in Jerusalem. Okay, so they were dedicating this feast, and what had happened is that there's a sacred place that had been defiled because some group of non-believers came in and they halved a pig and burned it on the altar, and so now they had this cleansing ceremony. Yeah, read the history. It's pretty crazy. Why a pig? I'm thinking, I kind of like ribs. But remember, the Jewish people, pigs were very unclean. Makes the prodigal son story even more powerful when you realize that the Jewish nation couldn't be around pork. It's kosher. I mean, it wasn't kosher. So you get into this fact that we can't eat that. It was one of the animals they couldn't eat by the old law, even though there's a new law today. But if you are practicing Jew, you watch what you eat. We all should watch what we eat. But the point is, it was unclean. It was unclean. And so someone had defiled the temple. And there's a lot of studying here if you want to go into it. But so Jesus was walking in the temple, and he was in the colonnade of Solomon. I called it Solomon's porch. Okay, I'm a Southern boy. And so a colonnade is just this big old long overhanging porch. It didn't have rocking chairs, but I've walked across the remains of that. But these colonnades were there, and it was where men came and they talked about important things of Scripture and God and higher learning and education. And they sat in the gate and they talked. And it was the man's job to do that then. Cultures have changed a lot. But some were about it for the right reasons. Some just came to argue, I'm sure. Some people show up at work just to argue. You know, let's go like, my painting that I'm doing today for Roots is a little bit like that. All right. So he's walking through there. And so what happens is now, because of all these stories that have been taking place through John's been telling us about in this book, people are beginning to say, that's the guy that healed the blind man. That's the guy that healed the guy who had been ill for 38 years. We got to go hear from him. So they're all moving in closer, and they're all trying to listen. And they've got questions for him because they're people who need to argue their point. And so they're pointing at him. And several times, you know, they have accused him. And in fact, he's already said one time, I am the light of the world. And they're going like, they start to pick up stones to stone him. And this is going to happen again. Here we go. So they gathered around him, and then they said to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us plainly. Just tell us if you're the Christ. You know why? It wasn't they really wanted to know he was the Christ. They wanted to accuse him of blasphemy because they believed no man, no human flesh and blood could be God. That's what they believe. So if somebody says they are, that is the ultimate penalty to pay. It's blasphemy, and we will stone you right here. In fact, for sure, right at the edge of the temple gate, and let you fall over into Gehenna, okay? The place where they burn all the trash. It's a good name for hell. And so there they go. And so I told you, and you do not believe me. The works that I do are in my Father's name and bear witness about me. I'm in verse 25, going into 26. But you do not believe me because you are not among my sheep. My sheep know my name, and I know them. Why weren't they the sheep? Because they had been so blinded by their ancestral love for law and right and works that they didn't think there was any other way to get to God. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. Oh, you're going to suffer here, and you're going to feel like you get ripped loose from everything, but I'm just telling you, if you're in the hand of the Father, your life begins when you leave this planet. That's the plan. Here, we just try and take as many people to eternity with us as we can. You try to make a dent. You try to leave a hole. You try to treat people with kindness. You want to leave a good footprint? Leave a footprint that's about helping people. I don't think my footprint's going to turn into a little more carbon or a little less carbon and create anything about climate control. I just don't. I think God created the world. God's going to make the world last as long as God wants the world to last. And I think God's going to stop the world when he's ready to stop the world. And so my job is to work through the difficulties in life and the stress I have to work through, but do that in a hopeful way that says, I think the Father has a better plan for me. And that's what the Christian faith is about. So John is not holding back here. He says, my Father has given them to me, all these sheep, these people, and he's greater than all, and no one can snatch him out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Fireworks, blows their mind. This is as close as he ever comes in Scripture to saying it. Boom. He says it almost to Pilate in the crucifixion. We'll see it later when Pilate takes him in and he says, are you the king of the Jews? And he says to Pilate, you say that I am. But here's where he says, I and the Father are one. So when Jesus says that he and the Father are one, these guys start pulling at their robes and adjusting their headdresses, I assume. I don't know what they're doing. They start scrambling around, and some of them are probably trying to shake the columns they're leaning on. And so I drew this little scene here of the part of the colonnade kind of going back that way. And maybe they're just building it here or rededicating it or doing some repairs. But I wanted a capital here. Just these filigree capital column heads, which are massive. They are massive. They're 4 and 5 and 6 feet across. My boys, I have a picture of my boys in Caesarea standing on the top of columns right before we were asked to get down. And I wouldn't recommend that to travelers, but it was a great shot. And so they were younger. I took my family there when my boys were in their teens, and my daughter, she was probably a teen too. She was probably 19, turned 20. Crazy time in my life, suffering. I just lost a job at a church, and they just said, we just don't need you here anymore. And so it wasn't one of those great turning looses of where you get like, hey, we're going to turn you loose with a good parachute. We won't just push you out of the plane without a chute. And so I had one of those. Everybody had. It's part of the suffering here in this world. So what did I do? I took all the money I had. I took any 401k I had stored up. I took any savings, and I bought tickets for the whole family to go to Israel. You think, is he right? Well, I'll just tell you this. It's probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. Not that the land is any more important than our land here and where you live. But there is something special about it because in all the places in the world, Jesus touched down. He touched down there. And I wanted to go there and see some geography for these stories that I've been telling people for a long time. Children's stories and messages, and not as a preacher, but as a person who led worship and who built creative stuff for churches and consulted. I wanted to see it take place, and I wanted my kids to experience it and said, this is the truth we stand on. And man will always argue because man puts man stuff in front of God stuff. It's just who we are. And so for me, listen to this as it continues. He says to them, I and the Father are one. And the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. There they go again. Boom. You remember, if you ever watch this show ever, if you ever watch GoodNewsRoo, you always hear me say, the reason there's so many rocks in Israel, the story is in Jewish tradition that when God was done creating the world, he had some rocks left over, and he goes, just put them in Israel. They'll have something to do with them. And so there's stones and rocks everywhere. So he says to them as they start to pick up stones. And so here I have this guy who's sitting here. He's an elder. You can tell as I paint some colors into what he's wearing here. He's sitting here and he's got a big old rock in his hand, and they're thinking, go ahead. I'm just about ready to take you out of this world. He has no idea he's dealing with God himself in man, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity. Jesus is all God, is all man. Jesus answered them, I've shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? Which one of these good works? You guys are so into works. You've seen all these good works. So which one of those are you going to stone me for? And they answered, it's not for a good work that we are going to stone you for, but for your blasphemy. Because you, being a man of God yourself, Jesus answered them, is it not written in the law that if I said you are gods, if he called them gods to whom the Lord of God came, the scripture cannot be broken? And they're going like, oh no, he's quoting the scriptures. Do you say of him who the Father consecrated and sent into the world? You're the ones that are blaspheming if you say that. Because I said I am the Son of God. If I'm not doing the works of my Father, then don't believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. And again, they sought to arrest him. So they thought, okay, let's at least put him in jail because we can't figure out what he was doing. So he went away. He went across to the Jordan, to the place where John had been baptizing first. So he went back to the river, kind of back to the first. And there he remained. And many came to him there. And John did no sign, but everything that John said about the man was true. And many came and believed him. And they're going like, whoa, John said one was coming who's greater. John said one who's coming who is connected to God the Father, who was here before I was. John said this and this and this. And they're going like, he really is proven to be that. So here's where the Apostle John, writing his story, starts to really make his case to you and I today who read this, that this Jesus was God. So when we follow Jesus, we're following God. When we surrender to Jesus, we're surrendered to God. And that is the gospel in a nutshell. That's the good news, is that when we're one of the sheep, nothing can snatch us out of the Father's hand. I drew this for this reason. Sometimes you just cannot think plainly. You just can't think clearly. And so you need a place where you go and sit. When I was 11, 12, 13 years old, and then when I got into my early teens, and I had a guy who didn't ever ask to be my mentor, and I didn't ask him to be my mentor. He just sort of showed up one day. He was a hero in my life. He was a man who, I'm reading a book right now that I really love. It's called Sage. He was a sage, but he never said, I'm a sage. Let me tell you, he never said that. He said, hey, want to hang out and get some coffee? I said, man, I'm loving to drink coffee. My granddad made me a cup when I was about 6, and I don't think I liked it as much as I like it now, but he made coffee. He was a left-handed guy who wrote all the way around with his arm like this, and he would make notes, and he just became a dear friend of mine through this ministry of Young Life. And he and I built electric trains together, and we put fence posts up on his farm together. And one night I'd wheelied up my driveway on my motorcycle, ripped my knee open, and I told my dad, hey, I'm going to go see my friend and Alec. And I squeezed I reached across and with my hand on my throttle, I reached across in my opposite knee and squeezed the cut closed, and I drove to Alec's house. It was about 4 miles, and he goes, what are you doing? I said, I need you to take me. And so I have my knee sewn up, and he said, nobody at home? And I said, well, Dad was. I just wasn't really ready to tell him that I had just done a wheelie after he asked me not to. He said, "You're going to keep doing that till we have to take you to the emergency room." So it's about a week later. He goes, "What are you limping for?" My dad said, "I got some stitches in my knee." He goes, "Uh-huh." Alec was that guy. So for me, I would come home. Alec was some of the answers, but I'd come home and I'd get my fishing rod. And some of you know this story about me. I even paint about it sometimes. I would not even bait the hook sometimes. I just throw it out there. Sometimes I just throw something on it, not even worry. And I just sit there, and as the water lapped in, this was a little cove that I'd go to. I would just contemplate. Sometimes I'd even forget about the fishing rod, and I'd just start throwing little pebbles out there and watching the ripples. And I think these guys were trying to reason, and I wrote that here, reason it all out, who he was. I think that's where we are. I think we're trying to reason who he is in my life, and what does that have to do with today, and why is that even important in the first place. And I think what happens when we do that is that we figure out that there are some things that we just may not have the answers to, and we have to say, okay, God, you know this, figure it out for us, and help us just get it squared away. And so I think that's what John is telling us here, that there's a realm that we just are not going to understand. And sometimes people just go, well, I have to understand everything. And you go, honestly, if you have to ever understand everything and can't take anything in faith, there may be a little bit of a difficulty there that you're going to struggle with some. So what I wanted to do is just sort of paint this guy in his robe here. And I just put him as a little bit of a Pharisee or a Sadducee or one of those C's. And there's a rock in his hand. And here's these Corinthian columns. I just thought I'd put a little French gray on there. Clean out this brush a little bit. I have learned something that we'll talk about in some other classes about these sable brushes. You really have to wash them a little more. They just don't flip the paint out like the nylons. And so you're going to wind up with a little bit of other colors in your brushes if you're not careful. And so just a touch of a little bit of brown in here somewhere just to age these columns a little bit of French gray, even though it wasn't in Paris. But the rock there has a little bit of yellow to it, and it's a little bit of like yellow marble. It's travertine is really the color. It's granite. All right. And so there's my little painting. So the point is that, and then the ground is going to just be brown, just sage brown, just mummy brown, ugly brown. So there it is. I'm telling you plainly that I am, and they're going like, I just have to sit down here for a minute and reason that out. So I hope you have some time today to finish a drawing in here and read the story, maybe 3 or 4 times. If I told you I just read this once, it'd be a mistake. I've read it many times, and it's different every time I read it, and yet there's parts of it that are so powerful. And so this is me saying everything that I've been told in the world and everything that everyone else has told me, in most cases, is just guesses and wrong. And then they get so locked into it that they'll even argue you over it. And I say, like the blind man said when Jesus healed him, why was this man born blind? The disciples asked. Does it show that of his bad sin, or that his parents sinned, or something terrible happened in his life that turned this? He goes, no. It was just to show the power of God. And then they came to the man and they said, who is he, and why did he heal you? And he goes, I don't know. Ask him. And he says, well, you have to tell us more about him. And he says, why are you so interested in this man? Do you want to believe him too? And they're going like, what did you say? And he says, look, all I can tell you is this. All I can tell you is this. This is the whole crux of GoodNewsRoo. Paint what helps you remember the story, because the story is where the truth lies. His story, not history, his story, God's story. The truth lies in this, that Jesus is God. And so what are you going to do with it? So you got to go sit down somewhere and you got to reason it out. So the blind man says to them, all I know is this. I was blind, and now I see. And they're going like, God. It's like The Beverly Hillbillies. Dang nabbit. I was blind, and now I see. That's great news when you start to see who God is and who God made you to be and how you find your place in that. That's good news right there. All right, so man, next week we are going into the death of Lazarus, and it's in a little town that Jesus loved. There's many commentaries, there's books out, there's all these stories about how much Jesus loved Bethany. He loved the town of Bethany. Something about it, you got a little place that you just go, that's the spot I love right there. There's this one spot. I just told you about Deep Cove. I didn't mention it as Deep Cove, but I just said there's this place in outside Knoxville, Tennessee, on Fort Loudon Lake, and I'd go down off the hill, and there's a little cove in there. I could always tell you there are going to be some crappie there, some huge, beautiful bluegill there. There wasn't many bass there. Some big catfish that wasn't interested in catching and taking home. It's too far to walk back up the hill carrying a big catfish. But I had a little stringer. If I could get some crappie. But sometimes I just walk down there, toss some rocks out, and I just reason with life. Wow, do you have a place that you go do that? My art does that for me sometimes, especially when I'm just doodling and not when I'm trying to really produce art, when I'm just thinking, when I'm just reasoning things out. Take some time today and do that. I pray in those times too. So have a place where you do that too. I don't think you need a closet, but if you got one, go for it. I just kind of pray best when I'm driving. And by the way, I do listen to some nice music when I'm praying. I don't think you have to get that organ out to preach a sermon. But don't get too locked in on what you'll argue over when there may be something else going on underneath the surface. That's my word to you today as a storyteller. And thank you for being a part of this. It's always fun to be with you. I'm out of here like a herd of turtles.